Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to be getting into episodes 692 through 694, which will cover manga chapter 754 through 756, as well as, believe it or not, a couple pages from chapter 758 for some reason. But yeah, Luffy and company make it to the third plateau, but is stopped by the return of Sugar and her new toy army. So, synopsis. The battle continues to heat up as our heroes begin to converge on the Flower Garden, but are stopped by Sugar's resurrection and her immortal Nutcracker Army, while Franky and the Tontatta struggle to get into the Smile Factory to destroy it, as well as rescue Princess Mancherie. Alright, so differences. Again, yeah, there's a decent number of differences like there have been in a lot of the Dressrosa episodes. So first off, the scene where they first encounter the monster nutcrackers is a lot longer in the anime. In the manga, they only show up to where they come face to face with them for the first time, essentially how episode 691 ended. Then this episode should have started off with the continuation of Zoro versus Pika. The next time we actually see the canon continuation is when Farrell gets his head bitten off. Well, I guess it's not bitten off, but he gets his head bitten. And then the next change is when Franky distracts Senor Pink by telling him about the old lady that was in need of help. In the anime, it shows Senor Pink actually going off to help her, while the manga stops short of him saying, "Is that so? That's sad." So the manga leaves you hanging whether this actually worked or not until you see Franky does in fact get the door open and he enters the factory. The anime also shows Senor Pink getting to that alley, only to find a bunch of cats just lounging around. However, the scene where he's still in the alley after he discovers that he's been duped, but says that he's glad there wasn't an old lady in trouble, this dialogue is actually in the manga. However, he says this as he's swimming back instead of in the alley like in the anime. There's also an extra scene added that's after Franky hugs Queen, where we see Luffy and company fighting the Nutcrackers for a bit more. And this scene has all been added in the anime completely. This was never in the manga. We don't actually see this fight resume till nearly another chapter later. Next, the scene of Viola searching for Mancherie is extended in the anime, where it actually shows her searching and Usopp wondering what Mancherie looks like, with him even doodling what he thinks she looks like based on the description that Leo gave him earlier, which is kind of funny. And it's also not that far off. Although, yeah, it's kind of funny how that worked out. Additionally, in the manga, after this scene, we get our first look at Mancherie, who's held captive and wishing for Leo to come save her, while in the anime it skips this scene and jumps straight to Kinemon catching up to Kanjuro in tow. And this is the scene that was actually in chapter 758, which was brought further up. And then the reveal of Mancherie is set up as the cliffhanger for this episode, so it's pushed a little bit later. Now, the opening 5 minutes or so of episode 694 is all added filler as well. It shows Bartolomeo hilariously fantasizing meeting up with his idol Luffy again, and him freaking out about it. And I think Toei creating these absurd fantasies for Bartolomeo and Hancock surrounding Luffy are some of the best original filler material that they ever make. The canon material is fine, but I love these added like fantasizing between these two characters. And now, the actual canon material doesn't resume till Viola tells Leo about the location of Mancherie after she discovers it. So, another one is the scene where Usopp epically takes a stand to protect his nakama and declares that he will snipe Sugar before she can get to Luffy actually happens much later, again, almost 2 chapters later, but is moved up. There's another scene after this where it goes back to seeing the gladiators fighting the Don Quixote family executives. This was not in the manga. In the manga, the next canon thing we actually see again is Farrell, who was bitten by the Nutcracker, and Bartolomeo and Robin falling in front of them due to Gladius's attack. And then finally, the anime shows us Luffy busting out Gomu Gomu no UFO again to attempt to take out more Nutcrackers before Bartolomeo comes crashing down. This was not in the manga. In fact, the first thing you see of this scene is Robin and Bartolomeo crashing down on top of them. And so, yeah, this again was added. But although I like Gomu Gomu no UFO, and the only time I think canonically we ever see that move is in Punk Hazard, so it's nice to see it being used once again at least, even if it is filler. All right, so let's get into the episodes now with all those filler material and changes out of the way. As Luffy and company are staring down an army of monstrous toy nutcrackers, Zoro and Pika continue, and it's becoming clearer and clearer to us and Zoro how Pika's powers actually work, as we see Pika get a little scared as Zoro cuts through Pika's outstretched stone arm, getting closer and closer to Pika, as he kind of anxiously has to wait to escape the stone form, indicating that if you were to actually reach the real Pika, you can hurt him, but also that moving in and out of the stone isn't as instantaneous as first thought. Now, one translator's note here. So Pika uses an attack called Pulpa Stone, where he sprouts a bunch of stone tentacles to attack Zoro. Pulpo apparently is octopus in Spanish, which fits the Spain/Spanish theme of Dressrosa. And so yeah, I guess Pika names his names based on Spanish words, which makes sense. However, just as Zoro is starting to potentially understand Pika's ability, a new wrinkle enters the equation with Robin and company flying in to get past them to get to the plateau. But this, of course, leaves them in an incredibly vulnerable position, just kind of floating in the air for an attack from Pika that could come from anywhere, really. And revealing that Pika transforms into a building-sized fist to punch them out of the sky. And here we learn vaguely that there is a limit to how big Bartolomeo's barriers can be and how much he can stop. In this pinch situation, though, of course, Zoro comes in for an awesomely badass save as he shows an even more powerful version of the 108-pound cannon with the 1080-pound cannon, as he's finally able to land an attack on Pika's real body. But it's not so much the attack and its successful hit that makes this scene so freaking amazing. It's what Zoro says and his aura during this moment. As Pika is reeling from probably being damaged for the first time in, I would assume, over a decade, Zoro walks up to him with that badass menacing face and says, "Hey, soprano bastard, I forgot to tell you one thing. The Straw Hats aren't just Straw Hat Luffy and God Usopp. Don't forget, I'm the man who will one day become the greatest swordsman in the world." And I think all of our collective reaction to this was exactly how Bartolomeo reacted, with just pure unfiltered hype and chills. In fact, everyone's reaction here just adds to the awesomeness of this scene, as Rebecca and the Tontatta are absolutely shocked. And in the manga, Robin is shown with this sort of relieved but big smile. And I don't know why Toei minimized her smile in the anime. They made it so her mouth is her usual closed mouth grin, but in the manga she has a large open mouth smile with kind of a sweat bead on her cheek to show that she was a little worried, but also very happy that Zoro was there. And yeah, I don't know how else to describe this moment other than to say it was so damn cool. I mean, Zoro is just amazing in this scene. And Zoro is so cool during this entire arc with his fight with Pika and stuff, as we'll see later on. The thing I love so much about this is that we've always known that Zoro never looks down on Usopp's strength and is quite possibly one of, if not his biggest supporter, who's always looking out for him and secretly encouraging him on. And he fully recognizes God Usopp alongside Luffy and himself with this statement. And I also think this was a dig at the fact that Zoro feels a little slighted by only being considered a 2-star bounty, while Luffy and Usopp got higher bounties at 3 and 5 respectively. So I think this was also just Zoro being like, hey, I'm up there with these guys, and you just kind of piss me off by disrespecting me, which is pretty funny in and of itself. But yeah, more so the thing that stands out to me about this scene is just how Zoro doesn't even question or belittle or think any less of Usopp. He believes in Usopp as being right up there with them, as being one of the most influential people in this conflict, because he is. And I love that Zoro does not diminish that at all. Now back at the Smile Factory, the Tontatta are going wild, But I love that they're so gullible that they can't even hear a lie or else they potentially fall prey to them. So they put in earplugs, but because of that, they can't communicate with each other anymore. And later on, their own gullibleness apparently extends to written instructions as well, as they have to follow all the posted signs like not to run and to keep out of rooms. But luckily, Maoji, the princess's aide, a new character that we were introduced to, he's basically sort of the Igaram of Manchuri, one of the Tontatta elder warriors, and he's already going so fast that he can't stop himself from busting down the door to Manchuri's chambers. Now, Maoji, you might recognize his voice as being played by Cho, aka Brooke's voice actor. So like in Impel Down, when the main cast is absent from the story, they will give certain roles to the missing cast members, and since Brooke is missing from the story right now, it frees up Cho to do other roles in the story to give him some work. This was, an example of this would have been when Nakai Kazuya was given the role of Sal Death, because Zoro obviously is not in Impel Down, and you saw a bunch of other examples of different Straw Hat actors playing other characters because their characters were not part of the story at the time. Now, moving on, during this, another group of Tontattas get the doors to the factory unlocked. And I love this very Oda joke that explains away why, amid the fierce battle between him and Senior Pink, he heard that ever so faint clicking of the lock being unlocked. It's due to his Franky ear, which is stupid, which the narrator goes out of his way to make clear is not any sort of cybernetic enhancement, but just that Franky naturally has had really good hearing this entire time that's never been indicated before. So they have to take this moment to explain this, how he heard that. And I feel like this is a very Oda joke because for all of Oda's amazing world building, character development, and storytelling, he sometimes just throws in these random things to explain away certain aspects of the story. And I as dumb as this is, I find it more funny. And so I don't even care that it's just some random fact that he introduces about Franky to explain away some ridiculous feat that he's just accomplished. Then Franky, in another ridiculous and hilarious moment from this fight, is when Franky tricks Senor Pink by telling him earlier he saw an old lady in need of help, and Senor Pink just without question goes off to help her. He does make it seem like he doesn't care at first, but then just goes. Like, there's a couple things that hinder this scene in the anime, though, and especially if you're watching through the Crunchyroll subs. So first off, like I mentioned in the differences section, it's left a little bit of a tiny cliffhanger of what actually happened, because in the manga, the scene cuts off before Senor Pink is seen leaving, and we don't have a full picture of what happened until we see Senor Pink swimming back, begrudgingly yelling, "There was no old lady in need of help," although I'm glad there wasn't one. So the surprise twist of this gag is spoiled long before the punchline even gets delivered. The other issue with this scene is when it comes to the subtitles is that it changes the tone of Senor Pink completely. So in the subtitle, he says, quote, "Oh yeah, that's sad," kind of making him sound actually sympathetic to the lady, which is definitely not the tone he gives off in Japanese. So in Japanese, he says, "Souka, zama ne na," which translates roughly to, "Oh yeah, serves her right," or "Oh yeah, sucks to be her," which of course makes him appear much more like an asshole and couldn't care less for this old lady, which is why it's surprising when 2 pages later, Franky appears at the door without Senor Pink, and even more hilariously, that another page later, after that, Senor Pink is shown swimming back, frustrated that there was no old lady, and that he'd been tricked because despite sounding like he had no sympathy for this old lady, he did in fact leave the fight to go help her. And the anime just completely butchers this gag, especially for English subtitle viewers, which is really a shame because, yeah, it's built on the fact that it adds a little bit more depth to Senor Pink, and it completely just removes a lot of that. I mean, you still get that, but I don't know, you lose. I think you lose a lot in the joke, the way that Oda originally meant it to be sort of conveyed. And this is really our first glimpse that there is far more to Senor Pink than a crazy weird villain. He has a weird code of honor almost kind of like we talked about with Bellamy, like that could be hiding a decent dude if it were not for the fact that he's following Doflamingo, a crazed psychopath. It's interesting that Oda decided to explore Senor Pink of all the villains in the Don Quixote family outside of Don Quixote himself. And I think the only other member that remotely gets explored in any sort of depth, and it's not saying much, is Baby Five, which we will get to see a little bit more of later. Not in these episodes, really, but there's a small hint to the start of it, but you don't really get to see a lot of it till a little later. But yeah, before the doors to the factory can be fully opened, though, the boss of the Smile Factory shows up to vacuum up the Tontatta, and her vacuum weapon is actually the reference to her name as well. So her name is Queen, which is Japanese for suction, so that's why she uses a vacuum. This character seems like a really random inclusion to this arc, but I do like the joke where all the Tontatta are trying to tell Franky about Princess Manchery, but before they can fully explain, Queen steps in to interrupt them, and without missing a beat, Franky just all completely seriously asks, "Is that Princess Manchery referring to Queen?" And immediately everyone screams, "No!" And because he says this with such sincerity, it's pretty funny. And however, when Queen begins her attack on the Tontatta again, Frank just casually walks up to her and hugs her. Now, when I first saw this, I thought immediately he was gearing up for a suplex on her, but it was funny seeing everyone else thinking he was actually hugging her. And turns out he's hugging her for so long because he's waiting for Senor Pink to come back so he can suplex her into Senor Pink. And this whole scene is really weird and ridiculous, and it's about to get even weirder. So Franky just kisses her out of the blue, and Queen basically turns into this sort of love-struck schoolgirl. And I think this was supposed to show Franky's sort of hard-boiledness when it comes to the ladies, and that it's not to be outdone by Senor Pink's sort of hard-boiledness with the ladies and his sort of, the bikini-clad gallery that he has following him. But it's such a random way of going about it. And now that they're finally in the factory, this is where the real hard-boiled fight begins. But seriously, this fight is equal parts hysterical and epic. After this intense hard-boiled stare down, their two opening attacks are insanely funny, with Senor Pink's diaper bombs. Where he shoots out these little circular bombs out of his diaper, but obviously it's referring to like poop. And then Franky's upgraded special nipple lights, which I don't know what they're supposed to do in this scenario. Like, does it act like a flashbang? Because it's not a laser, I don't think. But oh my god, the way Oda plays with your expectations throughout this entire fight is just too amazing. Like, Franky's moveset is probably the funniest out of most of the Straw Hats. Like, Oda loves playing with you with Franky's moveset. I think the one that always cracks me up is the Franky Centaur during Water 7 against Nero. How the legs come out the front, and he's this backwards centaur that looks stupid as hell, but then it turns out to actually be useful. Or the other one that I really always liked was the tracking shoulder cannons. Like how he makes them seem like he's about to shoot homing cannons, but the cannon isn't what homes. It's Franky himself who's the one running around and chasing the target. I mean, all of them are so funny. And the special nipple lights are no exception to that. Unfortunately, the story has to cut away from this fight yet again. And that is one thing that has always bothered me about post-time skip arcs, is that Oda has, for better or worse, created these incredibly complex stories with several dozen characters that we never get these sort of dedicated fights that play out in its entirety over maybe like 1 or 2 episodes in full sequence, because it constantly has to cut back and forth to make sure that each character's story progresses somewhat seemingly with the rest of the story. And don't get me wrong, I am still enjoying these arcs immensely, but it's hard to deny that the pacing and flow of these last few arcs as well, become more the case with the next several arcs after this as well. It makes the story a little annoying to follow because you're constantly left in a state of like incompleteness because you're cutting constantly away. And so it's like just when you think things are building up, it has to cut away, and then it has to service like 5 other stories before it can come back and progress that. Because otherwise, if you just go through the whole fight in one go, then you're skipping through time, and then you have to basically jump back, in time to follow another character's story and then do the same thing over and over. And so in that way, then you lose a lot of momentum that way too. So it's like, it's the lesser of two evils, but it is still kind of annoying. And I don't know how you would solve this other than to simplify the stories a little bit more, which I think Oda could potentially do, because some of these, particularly Dressrosa, as well as the next, the two large arcs, do suffer from this for sure. I think he handles this a little bit better in not the next arc, but the one directly after it. So Whole Cake Island. I think that one's handled a little bit better in terms of that, but it's also a lot more like condensed. You don't have characters like all over the place the whole time. It's the same group is in the same area. But yeah, it's definitely still kind of an issue, but also not. I don't know. I guess it's mostly up to preference. But anyways, back in the city, Usopp is freaking out that the citizens are getting closer and closer to them as they're trying to capture him and Riku to deliver them to Doflamingo. But Viola's response is so logical that it's kind of funny. She tells Usopp if the whole country is looking for them, where would they run and hide? Even Usopp can't even argue with that logic, which is kind of funny. But Usopp has another pretty funny line when he learns of Viola's powers and offhandedly comments that that's an ability Sanji would really want. And this whole situation becomes even more chaotic as Kinemon and Kanjuro finally regroup with Usopp. And I love that in the anime, Usopp freaks out at the sight of Kanjuro, which doesn't happen in the manga because because it just doesn't, it just cuts that out. It doesn't necessarily need to show that. But I love Kappe's screams. Like, his shrieks as Usopp are so good. But inadvertently, Kanjuro, thinking he was helping the people of Dressrosa, he poorly drew them a net ladder, hastening their arrival to capture them, with Kanjuro even threatening to perform seppuku for his mistakes, but easily reconsiders it with Kinemon's simple protest. And this whole scene had me busting out laughing because it's so funny. There's so much going on. It's a really good scene. But it's at the end of episode 693 that we finally get our first glimpse at Princess Banshiri, as Viola finds her while Riku teases that she has some sort of very useful ability, hinting that she has a devil fruit of some kind. And I think many of us had the same line of thinking of what that ability might be. And this is another one that I'm going to toot my own horn for, because I had predicted this right down to the name of the fruit when I read chapter 756 for the first time. Like, I knew exactly what her fruit was. Now, I'm not going to spoil it here, but we'll talk about it when it does get revealed. But I think you can kind of tell. And the anime even goes a step further and gives you the sound effect during the to be continued to really like show you what it could potentially be. And if you've played like video games or anything like that, you pretty much know what that sound effect indicates. But next we finally get back to the canon material with Luffy and the Nutcrackers. But things have taken a really bad turn as the Nutcrackers bite down on Farrell's head, which is freaking brutal. Like, this is actually kind of crazy how it just chomps down on his entire head. Like, poor guy. Even after Luffy and Cavendish blow seemingly finishing blows on the Nutcracker, it just gets right back up as if nothing happened, highlighting yet another reason why Sugar's ability is just so scary. Except apparently to Sugar, there's nothing scarier than things that resemble Usopp's long nose. The bit where the guy inadvertently serves her hot dogs is so damn funny. And I love in the anime, they go out of their way to increase the number of hot dogs on the plate and animate an entire pyramid of a stack of hot dogs, whereas in the manga, there's only 3 of them lined up on the plate, which I don't know why they went the extra mile to animate so many more hot dogs, but it's pretty funny. And while Sugar is still reeling from the trauma at the hands of Usopp, she doubles her resolve to turn every last person back into a toy, including Luffy, who is on a collision course with her. Not to be outdone, Usopp learns of Sugar's resurrection via Viola, and also makes his epic declaration that he's not going to let Sugar near Luffy, and commits to sniping her from a massive distance to the point where he can't even actually see her. And according to Kinemon, he also notes the fact that, yeah, this is going to be really impossible because you can't even see anything really. But he's going to have Viola tell him where she is, and he is going to snipe her via Viola's sight abilities, which is amazing. I got literal chills seeing Usopp this in charge and sure of himself. And just like Sanji told him on NES Lobby, there are things that only Usopp can do, and this is certainly one of them. This is what I was talking about when I mentioned how annoying Usopp was at the beginning of this conflict, but then he gets his moments later on. This is it. And do I think Oda went a little too far in the opposite direction of making Usopp annoying? Yes, definitely. But between God Usopp and this moment, I can kind of forgive most of it because what he does here is so amazing. And unfortunately, we don't get to see it in this episode, but we will get to see it in the next set of episodes. But yeah, Usopp is amazing. Now, at the same moment, Robin and the others are almost to the flower garden. However, they've been discovered by Gladius, and Robin and Bartolomeo are unfortunately shot out of the sky, dropping them down to where Luffy is on the 3rd level, while Rebecca is able to continue on to the flower garden on the 4th level. And speaking of chills-inducing epic Straw Hat moments, Robin also gets hers as well when she and Bartolomeo, along with Cavendish, who stays behind as well to step in to take on Gladius and the unkillable Nutcrackers for them, and giving Luffy, Law, and Kuros the chance to keep moving forward. And I love when the Straw Hats work together supporting each other. It's so awesome. And we got 2 of those moments in this set of episodes. Now, there's actually more to this moment for Robin and a few more scenes that make the scene get even more chills-inducing, but we will have to wait till the next episode to actually see this, unfortunately, so we'll definitely get into that for sure. But for now, we'll cut it off here. But if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment, and if you want to join me on the journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. Check out my Instagram at SunnyGo Podcast for updates of when I post new episodes and to see pictures of my manga collection and card collection. And as always, just listening to the podcast is enough for me, but if you feel like supporting me extra, you can check out my Buy Me a Coffee profile. And as always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time out to listen to my podcast. No spoiler section this episode, but stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye!